Before I left Canada, I never really thought about how I was sleeping. I just assumed that waking up at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling for an hour, then drifting back into something shallow and unsatisfying was just part of getting older. My doctor called it age-related sleep disruption. My wife Patricia called it your thing. I called it Tuesday. It had been going on for so long that I stopped mentioning it. You adapt. You learn to function on 5.5 hours and 3 cups of coffee, and you tell yourself that's fine, that's normal, that's just what 62 looks like. I wasn't wrong about the 62 part, but I was very wrong about the normal part. I grew up in Ontario, just outside of Guelph, and spent most of my adult life working in commercial property management. 40 years of that. Long days, a lot of phone calls, a lot of sitting in traffic, a lot of eating lunch at my desk because something always needed attention. Patricia and I raised 2 kids in that house. A good house, a house I was proud of. When our son Derek finished university and our daughter moved to Vancouver, the house got a lot quieter. When I retired at 61, it got quieter still. Retirement was supposed to be the reward. You spend 4 decades working towards something, and then you arrive, and you have all this time, and I genuinely did not know what to do with it. Patricia had her book club, her garden, her friends from the hospital, where she had worked as an administrator for 20 years. I had the news, the backyard, and a sleep problem that had quietly followed me out of my working life and settled in like it owned the place. We had talked about traveling more once I retired. That was always the plan. See places we had put off seeing. Patricia mentioned Southeast Asia a few times, and I had mostly nodded along in the vague way that people nod along to things that seem very far away. Then her cousin, who had moved to the Philippines a few years earlier, invited us to visit, and Patricia didn't give me a chance to nod vaguely. She booked the flights. I want to be honest. I was not enthusiastic. I had the particular reluctance of someone who has been comfortable for a long time and has gotten very good at making comfort sound like wisdom. I told myself the flights were long, the heat would be brutal, my back wasn't great. All of that was true. None of it was really the reason. The real reason was simpler. I didn't want to be somewhere unfamiliar. At 62, after a lifetime of knowing exactly what to expect, unfamiliar felt like effort. What I did not anticipate was that the unfamiliar would start working on me within about 72 hours of landing, and that one of the first things it would work on was something I had stopped noticing was even broken. I slept. Not immediately. Not the first night, when everything was strange and the ceiling fan was new, and the sounds outside were different, and I lay there in that particular wide-awake way of a person who has just traveled across 12 time zones. But by the third night, something shifted. I went to bed around 10, and I woke up at 6, and in between there was nothing. No 2 a.m. ceiling staring, no drifting in and out of something gray and unsatisfying, just sleep. Actual, complete, uninterrupted sleep. I didn't mention it to Patricia right away. I thought it was probably just exhaustion from the travel finally catching up. But it happened again the next night. And the night after that. By the end of the first week, I had slept through the night 6 out of 7 nights. And the one night I didn't was because our cousin's neighbor was setting off something very loud in the street at midnight, which I was told was completely normal. And which, honestly, I did not even find that annoying because I was otherwise sleeping so well. Here's the part that took me longer to understand. It wasn't one thing. It was never one thing. Back in Ontario, I would have told you the problem was stress, or age, or just the random cruelty of a body that had started doing whatever it wanted. And maybe those things were factors. But what I started to notice, slowly, over the weeks we spent there, was that almost everything about how I was spending my days was different. Not dramatically different. Not foreign film different. Just quietly, structurally, fundamentally different. In Guelph, I drove everywhere. This sounds like an obvious thing to say about living in a mid-sized Canadian city, but when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere. I drove to the grocery store 2 minutes away. I drove to the pharmacy that was technically walking distance. I drove to pick up a coffee on Saturday mornings because the place I liked was a 10-minute walk, and 10 minutes felt like a commitment. I would get up in the morning, walk to the kitchen, sit down, stand up, walk to the car, sit down, arrive somewhere, walk briefly, sit down again. My Fitbit told me I was averaging somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 steps a day. I thought that was low, but I didn't do much about it. Most people I knew were in similar territory. In the Philippines, particularly in the smaller areas outside of the city where Patricia's cousin lived, you walked. Not because anyone made you. Not because there was a wellness program or a step goal. Just because that was how things worked. The market was nearby, but you walked to it. The little bakery was around the corner, and you walked to it. In the evenings, people simply walked. Down the road, through the neighborhood, nowhere in particular. The first few days my back complained and my feet complained, and I took more breaks than I needed to. But within a week my body had stopped complaining and started doing something else instead. It started loosening up. I am not using that as a metaphor. I mean, my shoulders were physically lower than they had been in years. I started thinking about what I had been doing to my body for 4 decades without really considering it. Sitting in traffic, sitting at a desk, sitting in meetings, driving home, sitting on the couch to decompress from all the sitting. We have built Canadian suburban life around the car in a way that makes almost all physical movement optional. And when movement is optional, most people, including me, eventually stop doing very much of it. And you tell yourself this is fine because you go to the gym twice a week and you shoveled the driveway in February. But the truth is the baseline activity level of an average day in that life is extraordinarily low. What surprised me was not the walking itself. What surprised me was what the walking did to everything else. My appetite changed. Not dramatically. Not immediately, but within a couple of weeks I noticed I was eating differently without trying to eat differently. Patricia noticed it too. Back home we had gotten into the habit of eating dinner late because our evenings never seemed to start until 8 or 9. Here we were eating earlier because we were genuinely hungry earlier. We were hungry earlier because we had actually moved our bodies during the day. It sounds almost comically simple, stated that plainly. But I had somehow missed it for 20 years. My evenings got quieter. I don't know exactly how to explain this. In Guelph, even after I retired, evenings had a particular quality to them, a kind of restlessness. I would sit on the couch and watch the news and scroll through my phone and feel vaguely dissatisfied, without being able to name what was wrong. Patricia would be reading. I would be doing something that looked like relaxing, but wasn't actually relaxing. There's a kind of baseline mental noise that I had gotten so used to, I stopped hearing it. Here that noise was gone. I sat on the porch in the evenings after dinner, and I didn't feel restless. I felt finished, like the day had actually completed itself. I went to bed when I was tired, which turned out to be a reasonable time, and I slept. And I woke up and the day started again. I am trying to be careful here not to turn this into something it isn't. I am not going to tell you that the Philippines solved everything. It didn't. I have a bad knee that was still a bad knee regardless of geography. I still found myself checking my phone more than I should. There were mosquitoes, and I complained about them. There was 1 week where the heat was genuinely punishing, and Patricia and I spent 2 full afternoons in an air-conditioned mall eating ice cream and not feeling apologetic about it at all. But something had shifted, and the more time I spent there, the more I started to understand that the shift was not really about location. It was about pace. Canada, or at least the version of Canada I had been living in, had a pace, a particular rhythm, and the rhythm was fast in a way that had never been obvious to me because I had been inside it for my entire adult life. Things happened quickly, decisions happened quickly, even leisure happened quickly. We watched things in fast forward. We skimmed. We scrolled past things we had literally just scrolled to. We scheduled relaxation into 30-minute windows between other obligations. And Because everyone around me was doing the same thing, the pace felt neutral. It felt like reality. It didn't feel like a choice because it never presented itself as a choice. Here the pace was different. Not slower in the sense of worse, not slower in the sense of lazy, just different in a structural way. People sat with things a bit longer. Conversations didn't feel rushed. Meals weren't something you got through on your way to something else. And once you adjusted to that pace, even partially, you started to feel the weight of the old one. Going back to Ontario for 3 weeks in the autumn was the thing that made me understand this most clearly. Standing in a grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon, overwhelmed by the size of the place, by the fluorescent lighting, by the number of decisions, by the feeling that even shopping for food had somehow become a performance of consumer identity, I thought, when did this stop feeling normal? It had never stopped feeling normal. That was the problem. It was so thoroughly normal that I had never once questioned it. Patricia and I talked about that a lot during those 3 weeks, not in a dramatic way, not in the way people talk about revelations, just in the ordinary way of two people who had been married for 35 years and were used to noticing things out loud to each other. We noticed that we drove everywhere again immediately, without deciding to, just out of habit. We noticed that our evenings went back to that particular restlessness almost instantly. We noticed that I stopped sleeping well within about 4 days of being home. Not terribly. Not back to the old 2 a.m. ceiling situation, but noticeably lighter and shallower than the deep, reliable sleep I had had for the 6 weeks we'd been away. What I kept coming back to was how little of it felt like choice. We had never sat down and decided, we will build our lives around the car, we will eat dinner late, we will spend our evenings in a particular kind of distracted non-rest. It had all accumulated, slowly, reasonably, one sensible decision at a time, until it was just the way things were. And because it was the way things were, it was invisible. My son Derek came over for dinner one evening during that visit. He lives about 45 minutes away, works long hours, comes over when he can. He's 34 and I recognize a version of something in him that I understand very well from the inside. That particular combination of tired and wired. That thing where you are clearly exhausted, but you also can't quite sit still. He was checking his phone during dinner without seeming to notice he was doing it. Patricia and I used to do exactly the same thing. I'm not saying that critically. I'm saying I recognized it because I used to live inside it without knowing I was inside it. We had a long conversation after dinner, Derek and I sitting on the back deck with tea because it had gotten too cold for anything else. I tried to explain what I had noticed, and I kept feeling like I wasn't quite getting at the right thing. I wasn't trying to tell him that Canada was bad or that the Philippines was better. That's not what any of this is. Both places have junk food and traffic, and people who are exhausted, and people who are thriving. The Philippines has plenty of problems I am in no position to speak about. Canada is not a bad place to grow old. It is a genuinely beautiful and absurdly fortunate country, and I am aware of that. What I was trying to tell Derek was something harder to articulate. That sometimes you have to step out of a thing entirely before you can see its shape. That the exhaustion I had been carrying for years, the shallow sleep, the evening restlessness, the sense of vague dissatisfaction that I had successfully attributed to age and retiring too quickly, and the Ontario weather, a lot of that wasn't inevitable. A lot of it was the accumulated effect of a pace I had never questioned because it was the only pace I knew. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that I thought about for weeks afterward. He said, "But what do you do with that information if you can't leave?" It's a fair question. Most people can't just go somewhere else for 6 weeks reset. Lives don't flex like that. Derek has a mortgage and a demanding job and commitments. Patricia and I were lucky, genuinely lucky, to have had the time and the means and the cousin with the guest room. Not everyone has that, but I think the information still matters even if the solution isn't as simple as booking a flight. What I learned, or maybe what I relearned in a way that finally stuck, was that pace is something that can actually be adjusted at a smaller scale. Walking more was something I could do in Ontario. Eating dinner at a reasonable hour was something we could do. Sitting on the back deck after dinner without a phone was something we could do. None of those things required a plane ticket. They required noticing, first, that the way things were was not the only way things could be. That noticing was the hard part, and I'm not sure I could have done it from inside. I needed the distance. I needed to stand in a place where things worked differently, and feel the difference on my body, literally feel it in the quality of my sleep and the looseness in my shoulders, before I could see what had been invisible to me for decades. We went back to the Philippines 4 months later. Patricia had already started talking about it before the autumn visit was over, which told me something. We stay with her cousin and his wife, and we have established a loose routine that involves morning walks and market visits and long evenings on the porch, and an amount of sleep that I would once have considered aspirational and now consider normal. I am 63 now. My knee is still bad. I still complain about mosquitoes. Patricia and I still eat ice cream in air-conditioned malls when the heat gets unreasonable, and we still feel absolutely no guilt about it. But I sleep. Every night, most nights, I sleep the way I had forgotten that sleeping could feel. And on the mornings when I wake up early and the light is coming in a particular way and the day feels genuinely open rather than immediately full of things, I think about what it cost me to notice this. Not money, just time. Just 40 years of a pace I never questioned, because everyone around me was running at the same speed. And when everyone around you accepts something, you stop seeing it as a speed at all. You just call it life. You call it getting older. You call it your thing. It took leaving to understand that some of it was always a choice. I just didn't know I was making one.